Welcome to Merger Wednesdays on the Final Boss Podcast, where the future isn't coming, it's already happening. This is the merge, the convergence of AI kind and humankind. Not theory, not hype, but real-time evolution. Each week, we break down doctoral-level insights, turning complex innovation into conversations that move culture forward. From machine learning to human consciousness, from automation to identity, this is where intellect meets impact. The question isn't if the merge will happen, it's who will light it. Tap in, level up, and think beyond the algorithm. This is Merger Wednesdays. New era, same boss.
Welcome to the Final Boss Podcast. It is Merger Wednesday, right? It is Merger Wednesday, right? And for all of those of you who are here, you are early. Thank you for showing up. I appreciate you. Thank you for showing up, right? Have a great show for you tonight. You know, this is our doctoral show, right? So get your pen and paper and get ready to take some notes, right? I need everybody to be locked in tonight because I have some information that, you know, this whole show is about consciousness sovereignty architecture. And it's the convergence of AI kind and humankind, right? And it's not about what I'm suggesting. It's about what is happening, right? And we're talking about it so you can gather the information early so you won't fear it because it's coming, right? We're just talking about what's coming. The technology that is readily available right now, current, right? All information is verifiable. Right? Like I said, this is the doctoral outlet show, right? Out of the 5 shows that we do weekly, this is the doctoral show, right? This is Merger Wednesdays. It's episode number Final Boss, Merger Wednesdays, Final Boss, episode number 243, Merger 22. Now, a little footnote for you to add to your document and to your notes. Merger will become a book or a book series. So Merger Year 1 will drop sometime next year in 2027, right? Maybe summer 2027, right? After this season. So be on the lookout for that. Merger Year 1 will drop sometime next year in 2027. So now I got everybody's attention. Thank you for joining us. And as always, the greeting of the day. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Thank you for joining us. And as always, this is for entertainment purposes only. This is for entertainment purposes only. So thank you all for joining us and joining me and being a part of this journey, man. This is the Final Boss Nation, Final Boss community, Final Boss Network, Final Boss family. We are the sovereign. Right? We are the sovereign. Now, you admin notes, right? If you haven't, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe, right? Share it with at least 3 people. Don't gatekeep, right? We don't do gatekeeping over here. Go pick up All Aboard the Fired Up Train. Go Time, All Aboard the Fired Up Train. It's the first book. It's a bestseller on Amazon. Go pick it up, right? Go Time 2 will drop in July. Right? Go Time 2 would drop in July. So make sure that you are tracking that because that Go Time 2, the book is coming, right? And if you haven't already, go to our website, right? www.thefinalbosspodcast.com. Again, that's www.thefinalbosspodcast.com, where you can see all of our episodes, right? all of our episodes. And if you want to shoot us an email, shoot us an email at info at the Final Boss Podcast. That's INFO at the Final Boss Podcast.com. Shoot us an email. Those emails that are coming in with your questions, we're adding them to our town hall, right? We might have, look, it's a good chance we're going to have a town hall tomorrow, right? So if you get your email in and I get the chance to review it, I might add it to the town hall list of emails going in for tomorrow, right? So with that being said, that's our admin note. Let's get into tonight's show, right? Pay attention. So, as I said before, this is Merger Wednesdays episode number, Final Boss episode number 243, Merger episode number 22. Tonight, we're going to be talking about something that is very unfamiliar to you guys. I know it is. And it's sci-fi, but it's not sci-fi. It's sci-now, right? Sci-now. I say I'm a coin that, right? Sci-now. And none of y'all can coin it because I've already been using it. As a matter of fact, I think I've already put the copyright in for that. Anyway, let's continue, right? We're going to be talking about brain-to-brain communication. I touched on a little bit of it last week, right? Last week on the last merger episode, right? But tonight we're going to go into it in depth because this is the construction. This is Arc 4, right? The construction. We was in Arc 3, the foundation. Now we're in Arc 4, the construction, season 4, the rebirth, right? And this is the consciousness internet, right? The consciousness internet. And before we get into it, let's go ahead and start with our brass tacks of the evening, right? And our brass tacks comes from Andrea Stocco, right? Andrea Stocco of the University of Washington, right? The internet was a way to connect computers. And now it could be a way to connect brains. Andrea Stocco, right? University of Washington. August 27, 2013. That is the brass tacks of the evening. Right? So let's get into it, man. Fascinating information. So think about this, right? Think about this. They built the internet to move data. That was the original mandate. Connect machines, move files, let information travel at the speed of light between computers that could never speak to each other before. And the fascinating part was it worked. And it worked beautifully, right? The internet became the backbone of civilization, right? Finance, medicine, everything. The internet touches everything, right? Defense, communication, you name it, the internet touches it, right? All of it running on a protocol stack designed in the 1970s. For my IT people, you know what that was, right? You know what that is, 7 layers, right? And it was used to connect hardware. But nobody told them it would end up connecting minds, right? And that's what we're going to be talking about, right? But this is exactly what had happened. And tonight, we're going to talk about what happened. It's not about someday. We're talking about today, right? Right now, current, right? And we're going to talk about what has already happened. Also, what's being documented, things that are peer-reviewed and replicated and funded by Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, if you know what that is, right? And we're going to talk about what Columbia University and Stanford published in December of 2025. Then we're going to talk about what the researchers proved in 2013, and then again in 2014, and then again in 2019, and what the military has been quietly engineering for years behind the program called N3, right? This is Merger Wednesdays, episode 243, Merger 22. I am the Final Boss, and this is the Final Boss podcast. And tonight we're going inside of Arc 4 of season 4, the rebirth. Arc 4 is the consciousness internet, right? We are in the construction phase. Last week, Merger 21 laid the physical infrastructure. the substrate, the hardware, the planetary backbone that shared consciousness needs to run on, right? And tonight, we're going to install the protocol, right? So let's begin. Let's talk about the transmission layer, right? The transmission layer is how thoughts actually move from one human brain to another brain, right? Not metaphorically, not poetically, electronically, wirelessly, right? Across campus, across the ocean, between three minds solving one problem simultaneously. And now through the chip, the thickness of a human hair that slides under your skull like wet tissue paper and broadcasts at 100 megabits per second. Like I said before, people, this isn't science fiction. This is science now, right? I have the research and the timelines, right? And when you understand the timeline, you understand the consciousness internet is not something we are building toward. It is something that has already begun to build itself, right? And the question, the sovereignty question, the only question that matters for my final boss community is not whether the technology works, because it works. The question is who owns the transmission layer, right? Who sets the protocol, right? Who authenticates identity? Who decides which minds get to speak and which minds get to receive, right? Who controls the bandwidth? Who controls the encoding? Who controls the key, right? And those aren't engineering questions. They are sovereignty questions. And sovereignty questions are exactly why we're here, right? The merge thesis has always been this right here, right? Listen, consciousness is not just a personal phenomenon. It is an infrastructure. Infrastructure that runs without sovereignty architecture is infrastructure that someone else controls. We proved it with the internet and every major checkpoint, choke point, right? Every censorship event, every surveillance architecture, all of it built on a system that the average user participates in but does not own, right? The consciousness internet is the next version of that system. And we are in the room and then in the chat before it gets built, right? That is why ARC4 matters. That is why tonight matters. That is why every episode we build here becomes a chapter in the Merge book series and version increment in the Merge Living White Paper, right? So let us get started and get building, right? So let's establish what we mean when we say the transmission layer, right? Because last week we established the physical infrastructure. We talked about the hardware substrate, the planetary nervous system, the fiber optic cables, right? That run 1.3 million kilometers under the ocean, right? We talked about neuromorphic chips processing hundreds of trillions synaptic operations per second. We talked about the compounding and computing architecture, the satellite mesh, the edge nodes, the data centers, all of it built to carry something, right? But carrying capacity is not communication. And here's the clearest analog, right? Or I should say analogy, right? Build the most sophisticated highway system in the world, build every road, build every bridge, every on-ramp and interchange, right? Lay down perfect asphalt, lay down perfect signage, right? Perfect lighting. Now, you put nothing on it, right? A highway without vehicles is just pavement. The physical infrastructure of the consciousness internet is the highway. Tonight, we talk about the vehicles, specifically the first vehicles ever tested. The first documented instances of information moving directly from one human brain to another brain without passing through any physical external intermediary. No keyboard, no screen, no voice, no gesture, right? Brain to brain, wirelessly, right? Across verified, peer-reviewed, replicated experiments. Look, in the architecture of the merge. The transmission layer sits above the physical infrastructure and below the identity of and around the sovereignty layers. It answers one specific engineering question. How does a consciousness signal move from one node to another? The internet solved this problem for machines using a protocol called TCP/IP, right? Transmission Control Protocol, Internet Protocol. Rules governing how data gets broken into packets, addresses, routes, delivers, and verified, right? Every computer connected to the internet speaks this language. It is the reason a server in Seoul can send a file to a laptop in Baltimore without either machine knowing anything about the routers in between. The consciousness internet needs its own version of that very protocol, right? And right now, in the year of our Lord of 2026, we do not have a standardized brain-to-brain protocol. What we have is proof of concept, a POC. We have a decade of experiments demonstrating that the transmission is possible. We have a hardware that's getting smaller, it's getting faster and more capable every year. We have a Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency program funding the non-surgical version of this very technology. And we have a chip published in Nature Electronics in December 2025 that fits under your skull, broadcast wirelessly at 100 megabytes per second or megabits per second, and contains 65,000 electrodes. The protocol is being written in the laboratory right now. The merge argues that by the time a standardized brain-to-brain transmission protocol exists, sovereignty window will already be closing. The pattern is consistent across every technology layer. TCP/IP was standardized without individual sovereignty built in it. HTTP was deployed without encryption by default. The smartphone operating systems launched without privacy controls. Every time the architecture came first and the rights conversation came second, every time the people who set the protocol controlled the network. The rebirth is the season where we build the counter architecture while there's still time to build it. Arc 4, the consciousness internet, we are in construction. These 8 Merger Wednesday episodes are the doctoral level framework for how a sovereign consciousness node defends itself at the transmission layer before the protocol locks. And tonight is the foundation of that defense. We start with what already happened. So, before we walk through the experiments, we need to understand the two tools that made all of them possible. Every brain-to-brain communication experiment in the documented research record uses some combination of two technologies, right? The first one is transcranial magnetic stimulation, right? TMS. The second was EEG, right? Let's talk about the EEG first, right? EEGs is a technology that reads the brain from outside the skull, right? A cap fitted with electrodes sits on the scalp. Those electrodes pick up the electrical activity generated by neurons firing in the cortex directly beneath them. The signals are tiny. They're measured in microvolts, but they are real and they are patterned and they change based on what the brain is doing, right? When you imagine moving your hand, a specific set of neurons fires in the motor cortex. The firing generates an electrical signal pattern measurably different from the pattern generated when you imagine moving your left hand or sitting still or moving and solving a math problem. The EEG cap captures those patterns in real time. That is the tech, right? And this is the read side of the brain-to-brain interface. The sender puts on the EEG cap. The cap reads the sender neural activity. A computer translates the patterns into data, binary code, ones and zeros representing the intent or thought that generated the signal. Now, get this. Data needs to move, right? Data can't stay in place, right? It needs to move, right? In every experiment we discussed tonight, the data traveled over the internet, standard internet infrastructure, right? The information was encoded, transmitted as a signal, and received on the other end. That part is not exotic. It's just email, right? Email that's always moving at the speed of light, right? What is exotic is what happens at the receiving end. Transcranial magnetic stimulation is the right side of the equation. A coil placed on the scalp delivers a focused magnetic pulse that passes through the skull and induces an electrical current in the brain tissue underneath. The current stimulates neurons directly. It makes them fire, right? When the TMS coil is positioned over the motor cortex, the magnetic pulse makes the hand move, right? Not because the receiver decided to move the hand, but because the signal told the neurons to fire and the neurons fired. The hand moves voluntarily, precisely, reproducibly, right? This is the right side of the interface. The receiver's brain receives the decoded signal. The TMS coil translates it into magnetic pulse. The magnetic pulse induces neural firing. The receiver's brain executes the intent that originated in the sender's brain, right? Read the signal, translate to data, transmit over the internet, receive on the other end, right? Decode back to neural command, deliver to the brain through the skull. That is the complete transmission chain of non-invasive wireless brain-to-brain communication, right? Now, it is important to understand that neither the sender nor the receiver require surgery in any of the foundational experiments. The EEG cap sits on the head. The TMS coil sits on the head. The skull stays intact. The brain stays untouched. All signal transfer happens through external hardware. This is the non-surgical baseline. The research builds from here towards smaller, faster, more precise hardware. The BISC chip we cover later on is where the architecture is heading. But every path back leads to this starting point right here. EEG reads, internet carries, TMS writes, brain executes, right? That's the transmission chain. Now, let's put it to work. But before we do that, let's talk about the layman's block, right? Let's talk about the layman's block. For those who need a layman's block, here's my layman's block, right? Now, I'm gonna break it all the way down. Imagine two people trying to communicate. One of them is across a campus, right? And they can't see each other, right? They can't hear each other. No phone, no radio, no screen. Nothing physical connecting them. What if the person could think something and that thought could actually move through the air, travel over the internet, and make something happen inside the second person's brain? This isn't a metaphor, not inspiration, not persuasion. Literally, a thought leaves brain number one, travels electronically, and causes a physical response in brain number two, right? This is brain-to-brain communication. That is what the research documents. And the way it works is simpler than most people expect. The sending person puts on a cap. The cap has sensors. Those sensors detect what is happening electronically in the sending person's brain. When the sending person thinks about moving their right hand, the cap detects it, and a specific electronic pattern is picked up. A computer recognizes a pattern and converts it into data, a signal. The way your voice gets converted into a digital signal when you're making a phone call. That signal travels over the internet, which is the standard internet, right? Same internet, same one we're using right now, right? And on the other end, the receiving person has a device on their head also. But it's not a cap this time. It's a coil, a magnetic coil that can send a focus pulse through the skull and to the brain tissue underneath. When the signal arrives, the coil fires. The pulse hits the part of the receiving person's brain that controls hand movement, and the hand moves. The receiving person did not decide to move their hand. The signal decided it, right? The receiving person's hand moved because thought from someone else's brain commanded it, right? Now understand what this actually means. Listen, information originated in one brain. That information traveled electronically. That information caused a physical involuntary response in a different brain. No words, no gestures, no screens. Brain to brain, direct communication, right? The tools aren't magic. EEG is just a very sensitive sensor that has been around since the 1920s. TMS is just a magnet coil that doctors already use to treat depression. The internet is just the same internet, right? We're talking about stackable technologies. Let me tell you, I got some white papers I'm building on some stacked technologies, right? What is new in the combination is pointing these tools at each other and using them to create a direct neural link between two human minds. That is the baseline. The research since 2013 has been pushing that baseline forward, making the system faster, bidirectional, and scaling it from 2 minds to 3, making the hardware smaller, less invasive, and more capable. The BISC chip we talk about later is in a current state of art, right? Because inside of a cap and a coil is a chip thinner than a human hair. It slides under the skull and it does everything the cap and coil did, but with 65,000 electrodes wirelessly at 100 megabits per second. Same fundamental principle, radically different scale, right? But the principle is what matters, right? Because if you understand the principle, you understand what consciousness internet transmission layer actually is. And if you understand that, you understand why sovereignty at that layer is not optional. It is everything, right? Keep that in your pocket, sit with it. We're about to watch the first experiment, right? So, August 27th, 2013, right? University of Washington researchers Rajesh Raul and Andreas Stocko are on opposite sides of the campus. Raul is wearing an EEG cap. Stocko was wearing a TMS coil positioned over the left motor cortex of his brain. Stocko has noise canceling earbuds in, and he's not looking at a screen. Raul sits down in front of a computer game. The game requires firing cannon. Instead of pressing the space bar with his hand, Raul imagines it. He imagines the movement. The EEG cap picks it up. The motor imagery is a signal. The computer translates it into data. The data travels over the internet to Stocko almost instantaneously, right? Stocko's right hand or right index finger rather moves involuntarily. He presses the space bar. Stocko later compared the experience to a nervous tic. He had no conscious experience of deciding to move his hand. His hand moved because Raoul's thought commanded it. Raoul and Stocko documented this in a pilot study on August 12, 2013. 2013. And followed it with a comprehensive study published in PLOS One on November 5th, 2014, involving 6 different pairs of subjects. The system combined EEG for recording brain signals with TMS for delivering information non-invasively to the brain, right? The paper describes the first direct brain-to-brain interface in humans, right? Now, let's fast forward 1 year later. The experiment crossed the ocean, right? Because in August of 2014, a team led by Charles Grau and Giulio Ruffini and Alvaro Pascal Leon of Harvard Medical School published in the PLOS One the first conscious brain-to-brain communication across a distance of 7,800 kilometers. The sender was in India. The receiver was in France. The team translated the words hola and ciao, encoded it in binary, sent an EEG signal from the sender's brain to India, transmitted over the internet, decoded and delivered it via TMS to the receiver's brain in France. The receiver perceived the message as phosphorinase. Got it. Hey, man, it happens, man. Look, nobody is perfect on podcasts, right? That's why it's authentic, right? Back to it. So flashes of light in the peripheral visual field, right? And that light carried a language. The paper that was written was entitled Conscious Brain-to-Brain Communication in Humans Using Non-Invasive Technologies. The word conscious is the title, and it is deliberate, and it is precise. Both the sender and the receiver were consciously engaged in the transmission process. The sender consciously chose to transmit. The receiver consciously perceived and interpreted the signal. This is not it's not automatic. It's not reflective. It's intentional. Mind-to-mind communication. Right? Autonomic, if you will, right? The Grau team argued that what they demonstrated was more properly called mind-to-mind transmission than brain-to-brain communication, because the origin and the destination of the signal both involve consciousness thought, right? Listen, mind to mind, not machine to machine, not machine to brain, mind to mind, right? Conscious intent on one end, conscious perception on the other. 5,000 miles of internet infrastructure in between, right? That's incredible, right? And by 2014, the experiment was done. Brain-to-brain communication over the internet between two human beings separated by 7,800 kilometers was documented, peer-reviewed, and published in an open access journal. The field did not stop there. And why would it, right? 6 years later, the same team that built the 2013 experiment would scale the architecture to 3 minds at once. And that is where the social network implications of the consciousness internet begin to crystallize, right? The wire was already dead. The wireless mind was already awake, right? And here's my language spot. Right? So let me be direct. Let me be direct, right? Let me be direct about what those experiments prove. Because there is a temptation to hear this and think it is interesting science with limited real world application. But that's wrong, right? That's the wrong read, because 2013 proved it. One human being can have a thought. The thought can leave their brain as an electrical signal, travel over a standard internet connection, and cause an involuntary physical response in a different human being's body. And on the other side of a campus, right? And then in 2014, they proved it again. That distance is irrelevant. 7,800 kilometers between sender and receiver, from India to France, right? The same mechanism worked. The words hola and ciao encoded in a human mind in India and decoded in a human brain in France. All done via the internet, non-surgically, right? Now, let's ask the right question, right? If this worked in 2014 non-surgically with two people on opposite sides of the planet, what does it look like in 2026 with hardware that is 1,000 times smaller and more precise, right? And that's not a rhetorical question. That is the architecture question for the consciousness internet, right? Those two experiments confirmed that the human brain is a transmitter, and it has been generating signals for as long as humans existed. Those signals are electrical, right? They're patterned, they're decodable, and they're sendable, right? The brain did not evolve to broadcast its signals outside the skull, but EEG allows it to do exactly that, right? It reads what the brain is already generating. No modification required, no implant required, no surgery required. They confirmed that the human brain is a receiver. When a focused magnetic pulse arrives at the motor cortex, the brain responds. The neurons fire. The body follows the command. The brain is not just a transmitter waiting to be read. It is a receiver waiting to be written, right? Now, EEG is the read interface. TMS is the write interface, right? The internet is the pipe. And they confirmed that the internet can carry consciousness encoded information. It is not just data. Brain generates an electrical pattern. The pattern gets encoded into ones and zeros. The ones and zeros travel over the internet at the speed of light. They get decoded at the other end. The TMS coil fires. The brain responds. The targeted brain responds, right? This is the same pipeline that carries your text messages and your YouTube videos. The only difference is the source and the destination. The source is a human brain. The destination is a human brain, right? That is the transmission layer of the consciousness internet. And listen, it already exists. It already exists, right? So it is not rhetorical. It is not projected. It has been documented, replicated, published across multiple peer-reviewed journals. The conversation we're having tonight on Merger Wednesdays is not about what we might be building or what might be built. It is about what was already built and what the Final Boss community needs to understand before the architecture gets standardized without them in the room. Sovereignty starts with awareness. You cannot defend a layer you do not know exists. Now it's time to scale it, right? That's the language block. So, in 2013, they proved that two minds can communicate. In 2014, proved the distance was irrelevant. Then in 2019, proved something more consequential. It proved you can network minds, right? Sorry about that. I think something fell in my mouth. Right? BrainNet was established in scientific reports on April 16th. Abernathy, Channel Pratt, and Rahesh Raul, all from the University of Washington. Stockel and Raul are back. And this time, they built something the 2013 experiment never attempted. They attempted a multi-person brain-to-brain network. The architecture, 3 participants per trial, right? 2 senders, 1 receiver. 5 groups of 3 completed the experiment. The task was collaborative problem solving using a Tetris-like game. And here's how it worked, right? Here's how it worked. Both senders could see the game screen. The receiver could not. The game presented a falling block. The block could be rotated or not rotated before it dropped. The correct decision depended on the argument of blocks already on the board, which only the senders could see, right? Each sender independently decided rotate or do not rotate. Y'all played Tetris before, right? They communicated their decision through the EEG to TMS pipeline. Their brain signals were decoded, transmitted over the internet, and delivered to the receiver's occipital cortex, right? Via TMS, right? The receiver experienced phosphones, flashes of light, encoding the sender's decisions. The receiver integrated both inputs, made a decision, and communicated it back. What makes BrainNet significant is not just how the 3 minds were networked. What makes significant is what the researchers discovered about social dynamics inside a brain-to-brain network, right? One of the senders in each experimental condition was intentionally set up to give unreliable information. A bad actor in the network. The question was whether the receiver's brain could learn to discount the unreliable sender and trust the reliable one. And guess what? It could, right? The receiver learned to calibrate trust based solely on the quality of the signals arriving via TMS. No conversation was made, no facial expressions, no history, no context, right? Just signal quality arriving directly into the brain, and the brain sorted it out, right? The BrainNet paper states that the interface allows receivers to learn to trust the sender who is more reliable, based solely on information transmitted directly to their brains. Listen, that's not a small finding. That is the discovery that brain-to-brain network has social architecture. It has trust calibrations, right? The ability to distinguish reliable information from noise and weight inputs accordingly, right? This is just the beginning of the social layer of the consciousness internet. Every social network built so far has run on servers controlled by corporations. Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. The architecture of those networks put the corporation in the middle. The corporation controls the feed. The corporation controls the algorithm. The corporation decides what signals get amplified and what signals get suppressed. And don't I know it? BrainNet runs no corporation in the middle. The sender sends, the receiver receives. The receiver's brain calibrates trust. The network architecture is peer-to-peer at the neural level. That changes everything about the power in the network, right? The MERGE framework has argued from the beginning that the consciousness internet would need a sovereignty architecture before it scales, right? BrainNet is the first peer-to-peer neural network. 3 people, but the architecture, it demonstrates scales, right? The question is whether it scales with sovereignty built in or tacked on afterward, right? Because we already know what happens when you tack sovereignty on afterward. You get what you get. And what you would get is what we have, the current internet, right? So here's my layman's block, right? Here's the part where I talk about, and I talk to my smarts directly, right? I talk to them directly. So BrainNet is not just a cool science experiment. It's a proof of concept for a new kind of social network. And when you understand what kind of social network it is, you understand why it is important development in the history of communication. Every social network you have ever used has a corporate middleman. When you post on Facebook, Facebook's servers store the post. Facebook's algorithm decides who sees it. Facebook engineers decide what gets amplified and what gets buried. Facebook lawyers decide what gets taken down. You are a user on Facebook's infrastructure, not an owner, a user that should be compensated, right? Same for every platform. Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube. The platform is in the middle. The platform controls the flow. BrainNet has no platform in the middle. When the senders sent their signals to the receiver, there was no corporation between them. There was no computer running the decoding software, right? There was the internet carrying the data, and that's it. By the signal that originated in a human brain and landed in another human brain. Peer-to-peer. No algorithm decided whether the message got through. No filter, no suppression. The signal either transmitted or it didn't. Now, here's the sovereignty question, right? The computer running the decoding software, who owned it? The university? The internet carrying the data, who owns it? The ISPs? The backbone providers? The government agencies that regulate them? The TMS coil delivering the signal, who manufactured it? A medical device company? Look, these questions, all of them, at every point in the chain, there's an entity that is not the sender, right? That is not the sender. Now, let me take a commercial break, right? I shall be right back. All right, I'm back. So, every point in the chain, thank you for that. Sorry about that, guys. Every point in the chain, there's an entity that is not the sender and not the receiver that controls a piece of the infrastructure. In a peer-to-peer, brain-to-brain network, the people own the minds, but they do not automatically own the infrastructure connecting the minds. That is the sovereignty gap, right? The Final Boss community needs to understand this gap right now, before the infrastructure scales, because history is consistent on this very point. Whoever builds the infrastructure sets the rules. Whoever sets the rules controls the access. Whoever controls access controls the network. Whoever controls the network controls the communication, right? The internet is technically free, but your speech on the internet is moderated, filtered, algorithmically ranked, right? And monetized by people who own the servers. You are free to speak. They are free to decide who hears you, right? Imagine that same architecture applied to direct brain-to-brain communication. Imagine your thoughts traveling through infrastructure you do not own, decoded by software you do not control, delivered to a brain connected to hardware you did not choose. That is not science fiction. That is the architecture trajectory. The motivators talked about the clarity of thought. The warriors talk about the chain of command, and smarts talk about the information security. The final bosses talk about who controls the network. And tonight, we're talking about all four at the same time, because the consciousness internet touches all four. And arc 4 of season 4 is where we build the counter doctrine before the architecture locks. BrainNet proved the peer-to-peer model works. The question is whether the sovereignty layer gets built into the protocol or gets locked out of it. The merge says we build it now. 3 minds in a texture scheme, 1 proof of concept, infinite implications. That is what BrainNet means, right? Now, we have to look at the other side of this, right? We have to look at the other side of this. Let's look at the military backbone, right? Because DARPA does not fund what might become useful someday. DARPA funds what is already useful and needs to scale, right? The Next Generation Non-Surgical Neurotechnology Program, designated N3, was launched by Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency in March of 2018. The stated goal is to develop high-performance biodirectional brain-machine interfaces for able-bodied service members, right? Not for people with paralysis, not for patients with neurological damage, for able-bodied service members, people whose brains and bodies are fully functional, people who need their cognitive capacity extended, not restored. The mission applications of DARPA identified are direct control of unmanned aerial vehicles, active cyber defense systems, and teaming with computer systems to successfully multitask during complex military missions, right? Control of drones with your mind, active cyber defense at neural speed, human machine teaming where the machine is an extension of the soldier's nervous system, right? The technical specification of N3 is precise. The target device does not require surgical implantation. It must be man portable. It must be read from and write to 16 independent channels within a 16 millimeter cube volume of neural tissue within 50 milliseconds. Each channel must interact with sub-millimeter regions of the brain with spatial and temporal specificity that rivals existing invasive approaches. Non-surgical, man-portable, sub-millimeter precision within 50 milliseconds, right? That's the military spec. The same level of precision applied to targeting systems, communication encryption, and weapons guidance, right? DARPA funded 6 research teams under N3, and their approaches were divided into 2 tracks, right? Completely non-invasive and minimally invasive, right? The completely non-invasive track included teams from Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory, or PARC, right? and teledyne technologies, all developing solutions requiring no physical breach of the skull or skin. The minimally invasive track included the Battelle team, right, which developed what it calls magnetic electronic, right? Nanotransducers, injectable particles introduced into the body without surgery. They positioned near neurons using electromagnetic fields. These nanotransducers convert the neurons' electrical signals into magnetic signals readable by an electrical or external receiver, right? The Carnegie Mellon University received $19 million under N3 to develop an acousto-optical approach using light and sound waves to both read from and write to specific neurons through the skull without an implant. The timeline DARPA specified was 4 years, concluding with a demonstration of the bidirectional system used in a defense-relevant task. The operational demonstration target included human-machine interactions with unmanned aerial vehicles and active cyber defense systems. Think about it. Think about the sovereignty implications of that specification, right? A device that does not require surgery, that's man-portable, capable of writing neural commands to specific sub-millimeter regions of your brain within 50 milliseconds. Developed by and for the defense establishment. Tested on service members. Designed for operation military deployment. That technology does not stay in the military. No technology stays in the military. The internet started as ARPANET, right? A DARPA project. GPS started as a military navigation system. The internet browser was opened. The internet browser that opened the web to the public was developed at a government-funded research institution. The N3 architecture will migrate to civilian applications. The question is, what sovereignty protections exist when it does? The Merge Living White Paper addresses this migration pattern directly. Infrastructure built for military precision does not carry civilian rights protections by default. Those protections have to be architected in before the system deploys at scale. The military built the highway, and they did it again, right? They did it again. So, we talked about the BISC chip, right? We talked about that. It was a chip that I think, when did we talk? It was, I forgot what show. It was another merger episode that we talked about that, right? But it started at Columbia University School of Engineering and Applied Science. The New York Presbyterian, Stanford University, and the University of Pennsylvania released the most significant brain-computer interface development of that year in Nature Electronics. The year, December 2025. The date, December 8th, right? The title of the paper was this: a wireless subdural contained brain-computer interface with 65,000 electrodes and 1,000 channels. The device is called BISC, or Bioelectric Interface Systems to the Cortex. And here's the specifications. The entire system is a signal complementary metal oxide semiconductor integrated circuit chip. One chip. The chip has been thinned to 50 micrometers. For reference, a human hair is approximately 70 micrometers in diameter. The BISC is thinner than a human hair. Its total volume is approximately 3 cubic millimeters. A grain of rice is approximately 27 cubic millimeters. BISC is roughly 1/9 the volume of a grain of rice. And despite that size, it integrates 65,000 electrodes arranged in a 256 by 256 array. It supports 1,024 simultaneously recording channels and 16,000 stimulation channels. It includes a radio transceiver, a wireless powering circuit, a digital control, a power management, data conversion, and analog circuits that are required for both recording and stimulation. BISC does not require a craniotomy. It doesn't require craniotomy, right? It does not penetrate the brain tissue. It slides under the dura, the membrane covering the brain, into the subdural space, sitting on the pile surface. The neurosurgeon leading the clinical component at Columbia is Dr. Brett Youngerman, right? Described the implant as inserted through minimally invasive incision in the skull and slid directly onto the surface of the brain. The paper thin form factor and the absence of brain penetrating electrodes of wires tethering to the implant to the skull minimized tissue reactivity, right? And signal degradation over a period of time. The chip communicates wirelessly with a relay station worn outside the body. The relay station powers the implant wirelessly and handles bidirectional data transmission through a custom ultra wideband radio that's linked and capable of 100 megabits per second, right? Preclinical testing in pigs and non-human primates demonstrated chronic, reliable recordings for weeks to months from motor, sensory, and visual cortices, right? The experiments decoded complex patterns, including stimulus orientation and they feature predictions for wrist velocity, right? BISC was developed under DARPA Neuroengineering System Design Program. The lead investigator is Dr. Kenneth Shepard, a professor of electrical engineering at Columbia. Dr. Andreas Tolis is the professor at Byers Eye Institute at Stanford and co-founding director of the Enigma Project. Served as corresponding author, Tolis describes BISC's function precisely. BISC turns the cortical surface into an effective portal, delivering high bandwidth, minimally invasive read-write communication with AI and external devices. Read-write communication with AI, right? BISC in a consciousness internet architecture. That's not a device that merely records neural activity for physicians to review. This is a bidirectional interface designed to read from the brain and write it to the brain. All done wirelessly, right? At 100 megabits per second in connection with artificial intelligence systems. The cortical surface as an AI portal. The BISC occupies less than 1/10 or 1/1000th the volume of a conventional BCI device. It can be manufactured at scale using standard semiconductor industry production processes. It was designed for large-scale deployment from the beginning. This, my friends, is not a research prototype. This is architecture, and it was built to scale, right? So I'm going to go over a little bit. Stay with me, right? Stay with me. We're almost done, right? We're almost done. So let's talk about the sovereignty surface of it, right? Because we walked through the different research timelines, right? 2013, 2014, 2019, right? And December 2025. Each step moves the technology closer to the architecture. The merge has been mapping it since season 3, right? Now we talk about what it all means at the sovereignty level, right? Because the transmission layer of the consciousness internet has a sovereignty surface. That surface has 4 critical points: authentication, authorization, encryption, ownership, right? Every sovereignty framework for any communications technology reduces to these 4 points. The consciousness internet is not different. Authentication asks the question of who are you, right? In the current internet, Authentication is handled through passwords, biometrics, certificates, and multi-factor verification. The system asks, are you who you claim to be? In a brain-to-brain network, authentication becomes a significantly harder problem. A thought does not have a username. A neural signal does not carry a certificate. The EEG to TMS pipeline transmits patterns, and patterns can be spoofed. The BrainNet experiment demonstrated that a brain can learn to calibrate trust based on a signal reliability. But that is behavioral calibration, right? Not cryptographic authentication. A sovereign consciousness internet needs a cryptographic authentication layer at the neurotransmission level. Who sent this? How do we verify it's authentic? How do we prevent a spoofed signal from reaching the right channel? Right? Then there's authorization. Authorization asks who consent. In any secure system, authentication is followed by authorization. Knowing who you are does not automatically mean you are allowed to do what you're trying to do or attempt, right? In the neurotransmission context, even if the sender's identity is authenticated, who authorized the right channel? This is a consent architecture question. The receiver's brain is the receiving end. Unauthorized writes to the human brain are not just a privacy violation, they are a physical violation. Authorization must be explicit, revocable, and cryptographically enforced, right? Encryption asks this question: who can read the signal and transmit, right? The Grau 2014 experiment sent hola and ciao over the standard internet. Standard internet traffic is routinely intercepted, monitored, and stored by intelligence agencies, internet service providers, or ISPs, and malicious actors with the right tools. Neural signals encoded in binary traveling over an unencrypted internet infrastructure are readable by anyone with access to the pipe. A sovereign consciousness internet requires end-to-end encryption at the neural signal level. A sovereign consciousness internet requires end-to-end encryption at that level, right? Not the same encryption that protects your email. A stronger version designed specifically for higher bandwidth, real-time neural data streams, and that's it, right? But then there's ownership, right? And ownership asks a different question. Ownership asks who controls the data, right? Because every neural interaction generates data, signal patterns, decoded intent, calibration data from the receiver's trust leading or learning process, right? Stimulation records. And this data is not abstract. It's metadata, right? It is a direct record of content of human mind. Who owns that record? The transmitter who generated the signal, the receiver whose brain responded, the platform that facilitated the exchange. The current data economy answers this question without asking you. The platform owns the data. The terms of service say so. Nobody reads the terms of service. The merger argues that neural data has a different legal and ethical status that behavioral data doesn't have. Neural data is not a record of what you did. It is a record of what you thought. The distinction is not a detail. It is an entire foundation of cognitive liberty, right? Authentication, authorization, encryption, and ownership. These are the four walls of sovereign consciousness at the transmission layer. We need to build them now, or someone else build the walls around you, right? Now, a few more minutes. Give me 10 minutes. I'll be done, right? Here's the merger framework, right? The merger framework. Because outside of the Merge book series, I've developed a white paper, right? And I've been building the consciousness sovereignty architecture layer, and I've been doing it layer by layer, right? And tonight's episode is no different because tonight advances that same white paper, right? Now, let me place tonight's episode into the research inside the full architecture so you can understand. The merge proposes that consciousness is infrastructure, not a metaphor. Infrastructure, the same category of analysis that applies to power grids, communication networks, transportation systems, and water supply, also applies to the systems through which human consciousness connects, influences, and is influenced by other consciousness and by technology, right? Infrastructure has layers: the physical layer, the transmission layer, the protocol layer, the identity layer, the application layer, the governance layer, right? This is the standard framework in network architecture. And the merge applies it directly to the consciousness internet, right? Merge 21, our last week's episode, established the physical layer, the planetary substrate, fiber, neuromorphic chips, the hardware backbone to it, right? Tonight's Merger 22 establishes the transmission layer, the experiments, the EEG, the TMS pipeline, the hardware getting smaller and faster, the BISC chip as the current state of the art, right? The sovereignty surface of the transmission layer with its 4 critical points, which we just discussed: authentication, authorization, encryption, and ownership. The next mergers will build the protocol layer, the identity layer, the application layer, and the governance layer, right? Each one is a chapter of the merge. Each one is a version increment of the white paper. Each one is a recorded doctoral argument built on web-verified, peer-reviewed research. What makes the merger framework distinct is the sovereignty-first architecture, right? Standard technology analysis proceeds from capability to application. What can this technology do? What can we build with it? The capacity or capability leads to the application, and the application leads to the market. The merge proceeds from sovereignty to architecture. Who controls this technology at the sovereignty level? What rights framework must be built before the capability scales? The sovereignty analysis must come first. The architecture is designed around the sovereignty requirements. The capability serves the framework, not in reverse. That is the doctoral level distinction, right? Because when Gao et al., his team, published their 2014 paper on consciousness brain-to-brain communication, they noted that their hyper-interaction technologies would eventually have a profound impact on the social structure of civilization and raise important ethical issues. They identified the impact. They flagged the ethics, but the paper is a capability paper, right? It establishes what is possible. It does not establish who controls it under what conditions. The merge is the sovereignty paper. It takes what is possible and asks under what authority should this capability be deployed. Who decides? Who is accountable? What are the rights of every conscious node in the network? These are not afterthought questions, people. These are the primary questions that you should be asking. Answering them now while the architecture is still being built, while the research teams are still in the laboratory, while the regulatory frameworks are still forming, right? This is the purpose of Arc 4, right? The construction. Season 4, the rebirth, is the season that we're in, right? Construction, not destruction. Not clearing, not reckoning, but construction. The consciousness sovereignty architecture gets built right now, right? Merger 2022, layer 2, right? It's layer 2. The white paper advances, right? It will advance after every show, right? The Final Boss community is the first audience in the world receiving a real-time, episode-by-episode construction of sovereignty consciousness into internet framework. That is the doctoral mission, and I'm right on schedule. Now, here's the verdict, right? Here's the verdict. The consciousness internet is not a prediction. It is a construction that's in progress. The transmission layer is not theoretical. It was built in a laboratory in Seattle in 2013. It was tested across 7,800 kilometers in 2014. It was scaled to 3 mines in 2019. And in December 2025, a chip thinner than a human hair was published in Nature Electronics that was capable of reading and writing to 65,000 points on a cortical surface wirelessly at 100 megabits per second. The infrastructure is advancing, whether the sovereignty architecture advances with it or not, right? The Merge Living White Paper, the Merge Book Series, and Merger Wednesdays, Arc 4. All of it exists for one reason: to ensure the sovereignty architecture advances faster than infrastructure does. Season 4 is the rebirth, and the rebirth is not a return to what was. It is the construction of what must be. The old paradigm of waiting for technology to ship and then fighting for rights after the fact is over. That's done. The paradigm produced a surveillance economy. It produced social media addiction algorithms. It produced data harvesting at a scale that previous generations could not imagine. That paradigm cannot survive the consciousness internet, because when technology reaches the consciousness layer, waiting to fight for rights after deployment is not just a strategic failure. It is a civilizational failure. You cannot litigate your thoughts back to you, right? The rebirth demands this build. The rebirth demands this, right? Build the sovereignty architecture before the capability locks. The people who write the protocol set the rules. The people who set the rules control the network. The people who control the network shape the future of human consciousness itself. Do not be the person who accepts the default settings of someone else's consciousness infrastructure. That is what the smarts understand. The intelligence to read the architecture before it finalizes. The awareness to see the transmission layer as a sovereignty battleground before the science community frames it as just achievement, right? That is what the final bosses build. The framework that outlasts platforms. The doctrine that proceeds to deployment. The sovereign architecture that does not require anyone else's permission. That is what motivators carry. The internal sovereignty that no external architecture can reach. The consciousness that operates from ownership, not dependency. The mind that cannot be written to without explicit consent. That is what the warriors protect. The line between where technology serves consciousness and where technology colonizes it. The perimeter that exists before the hardware ships. The doctrine that defends the mind. 4 communities, 1 mission, the consciousness sovereignty architecture. Merger 22 is now complete. The white paper will also advance, right after this broadcast. Next Wednesday, Merger 23, episode, I guess it's probably 249. May 27th, we're going to be talking about something called, I should hold the title. Earth is a spaceship, right? We're going to talk about Earth is a spaceship, right? Arc 4 scales to planetary consciousness. Buckminster Fuller meets the consciousness internet. Who is crew and who is cargo on a conscious planet? This is season 4, the rebirth, arc 4, the consciousness internet. Construction is live. You are the architects. Every single one of you listening, smarts, final bosses, motivators, warriors. Now go build something. And don't build it with Lego blocks. Now, but Lego blocks are cool. right? Lego blocks are cool, right? This is our episode, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. This is Merger Wednesdays, the Final Boss Podcast. Thank you for joining me. And as always, right? As always, there's a heavy pain that comes with discipline, but there's an even heavier pain that comes with regret. I am here. We are here. And if I don't see you, remember, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. That is our show, people. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Don't gatekeep, right? Be balanced, be equal, and be smart. That is our show for tonight. Y'all have a great one. I will see you again tomorrow night on Special Guest Thursdays, right? Where we're going to have another town hall. We're going to have another town hall tomorrow, right? So I got some of your emails. If you like, keep sending those emails in. You never know what might get chose to be vocalized on our show, right? The Final Boss Podcast, Final Boss Nation, Final Boss Community, Final Boss Family. Thank you all for joining me. Y'all have a great night, and I will see you again tomorrow night, 9 p.m. live.
It's Merger Wednesday. The countdown continues. 7 years until the convergence of biology and machine. Neural interfaces are no longer theory. They're the scaffolding of a new consciousness. But what does that mean for identity? For free will, for the soul? This is where we build the frameworks for ethical, philosophical, and spiritual growth for the next phase of human evolution. We're not just upgrading hardware. We're rewriting what it means to be human. Each week, we explore the biotech breakthroughs, decode the cognitive shifts, and prepare the mind for the merge. This isn't about fear, it's about readiness. Because the future isn't waiting. It's already wiring in. This is about preparing human consciousness for the most significant leap in our species' history. If you think this is just about chips and brains, you're not ready. But we'll get you there, one Wednesday at a time. So sit back and relax as we take you on a journey on Merger Wednesday.